I'm 26 years old, and I've never believed in or experienced anything paranormal until last week. I recently moved into a new apartment with two friends. One is 26, the other 23. The building itself is old, likely from the 1960s, but the apartment has been renovated and looks modern. Despite its fresh appearance, something about the place feels off. It's about 100 square meters with 3 bedrooms, and at first, I was excited about our new home. But soon after we settled in, strange things started happening. Things I can't explain. The floors are new, yet they creak loudly underfoot. The walls are thick, making it nearly impossible to hear the neighbors. Our landlord, an elderly woman in her 70s or 80s, has been nothing but kind, telling us that the previous renters lived here for a decade. The first week passed without incident. Then, 2 days ago, something happened that I can't shake. I got home from work around 8 p.m. I was alone, sitting on the couch in the living room, when I heard it. A faint but distinct creak from the wooden floor. It sounded like someone standing in the hallway near one of the bedrooms. The same room where I had felt an odd, unexplainable chill the first time I visited. Then came the sound of scratching. Slow, deliberate, like fingers running along wood. I froze, listening intently. The noises continued for nearly 30 minutes. I wanted to believe it was nothing, maybe just the floor shifting with the temperature or even a cockroach. But something about it felt wrong. When one of my roommates finally came home, everything seemed normal again. My other roommate was still out, and I didn't hear anything else. I tried to put it out of my mind. That night, after dinner, I went to bed around 12:30 a.m. Lying in my bedroom, listening to music through my earbuds, I started to relax. And then footsteps. I pulled out my earbuds. The sound was unmistakable. Slow, deliberate steps just beyond my closed door. Someone was in the hallway. The steps were heavy, not the light creaks of settling wood. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone. I quickly sent a message to our group chat. "Guys, if this is you, please stop." I waited, staring at the door. Then came the replies. My roommates sent pictures and recordings. They weren't home. They even shared their live locations. And yet, the footsteps continued. Then came the knock. Soft, deliberate, right in front of me. I sat frozen on my bed, my breathing shallow, my body refusing to move. My bedroom is small. My bed is directly across from the door. Whoever or whatever was out there was just a few feet away. Suddenly, my roommate's door flew open. She rushed out, turned on the hallway lights, and threw open my door. There was nothing. The hallway stood empty, bathed in dim light. But the fear in her eyes told me she had heard it too. I broke down, my body trembling as panic took over. My arms went numb, my breath came in short gasps, and then I started crying. My other roommate got home soon after, and they both tried to calm me down, offering logical explanations. But I know what I heard. Someone was there. I couldn't sleep in my room that night. I stayed on the couch, the lights and TV on until morning. The next night, I did the same. Since then, nothing strange has happened. No more footsteps, no more knocks, no more scratching. But I can't shake the feeling that something was there that night, just on the other side of the door. And I don't think I'll ever sleep in that bedroom again. This took place in 2003 when I was 8 years old. It was a Saturday, so I didn't have school and spent the whole day playing Spyro on my PlayStation. My dad usually worked on weekends, and my mom worked Monday through Friday, so she used her free time to go grocery shopping. Both my mom and dad always made sure I wasn't left alone for too long, usually just about an hour when I was little. One day, my mom asked if I wanted to go with her on her weekly shopping trip. I usually enjoyed going along since I could secretly put candy bars in the cart, but that day I was really busy playing Spyro. I asked her if I could stay home to finish my game. She agreed without arguing as long as I did my chores. That sounded good to me, so I happily agreed. After she left, about 10 minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. I thought maybe my mom had forgotten her sunglasses. A minute later, I heard the cupboards opening and closing in the kitchen. The sounds were loud, and I noticed the footsteps were heavy, much heavier than my mom's light steps. Then I thought maybe my dad had come home from work early. I paused my game and went to check in the kitchen. As I walked down the hallway, listening to the creaks of the floor, I turned the corner and suddenly stopped in my tracks. Standing right in front of me was a very tall man I had never seen before. He was pouring coffee from our pot, which was still warm from a few hours earlier. I don't remember everything perfectly, but at the time, I thought he was the biggest man I had ever seen. I estimated he was about 6 feet 5 inches and weighed around 280 pounds. After a few moments, he noticed me and said, "Hey man," in a calm voice, "I'm just having a little coffee before I head back to work." I think he was in his 50s with a long gray beard and mustache. He was wearing a bright yellow safety vest like the ones construction workers wear. I really wanted to leave right away, but his calm voice made me feel less scared. Even though he was a stranger and I knew he wasn't supposed to be in our house, he seemed very kind. I found enough courage to ask him what he was doing there. He said he was a friend of my dad's and was just stopping by for a short time. Looking back, I probably should have asked him more questions, but I was already very unsettled by how strange everything felt. So I simply said, "Okay," and went back to my room, quickly locking the door. A few minutes later, after he had finished his coffee, he knocked on my door and said, "I'm headed out for now. Tell your dad I said thanks for the coffee, and I'll see him Monday." Then he left through the front door. I watched him walk down the street until he disappeared from my bedroom window. About 30 minutes later, my mom came back from the store, and I told her what had happened. As you might imagine, she was very scared by the whole experience. She immediately made 2 calls, first to my dad's work to talk to him, then to the police. After I described the man to my dad, he said it could not have been any of his friends. That's when my mom called the police. She insisted that she had locked the door when she left, as she always did. So either she forgot or the man had unlocked it himself without forcing it. It was a warm July night in 2019, around 11 p.m. or maybe closer to midnight. My girlfriend and I were sitting in my car in the parking lot of Curry Village in Yosemite. As a kid, I always loved stargazing, and this seemed like the perfect place for it. But that night, the sky was covered in thick clouds, hiding the stars from view. With nothing much to do, we sat and talked, enjoying the quiet. Then, out of nowhere, my girlfriend tensed up. "I feel like someone's watching me," she whispered. I glanced around but saw nothing unusual. The parking lot was mostly empty, with only a few cars scattered nearby. She kept staring straight ahead, her voice uneasy. "I swear, I just saw someone standing right there." She pointed to a spot about 3 feet from our car. I dismissed it at first, thinking maybe it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But the way she kept glancing back at the same spot made my skin crawl. To shake off the unsettling feeling, we decided to step out of the car. The air was cool, the night silent, and for a moment, we forgot about the eerie sensation. But then we heard a voice, a deep, calm voice. Turning around, we saw a man standing just 6 or 7 feet away. He was tall, at least 6 feet, and dressed entirely in black. The night was so dark that we couldn't make out his face, just his towering silhouette. Something about him felt wrong. He wasn't doing anything outwardly threatening, just talking to a couple of teenagers nearby. But the way he moved, the way his eyes scanned the area, always returning to us, set off every alarm in my head. Then he turned his attention to us. "Are you guys here by yourselves?" he asked casually. "How long do you plan to stay here?" His voice was smooth, almost too relaxed. But as he spoke, he did something that sent a chill down my spine. Every 10 or 15 seconds, he took a small step toward us, slowly, methodically, closing the gap little by little. Then he mentioned the truck parked behind us. "That one's mine," he said, nodding toward it. It was then that I realized what was happening. With each step he took, he was backing us up against his truck, cornering us. My heart pounded. When he took one final step, closing the space between us to an uncomfortable distance, my instincts screamed at me to move. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand, but my fear was so intense that I could barely get a word out. My voice caught in my throat, coming out as little more than a stutter. Without thinking, we turned and bolted. The scariest part? He didn't follow. He didn't call out. He just stood there, watching, frozen in place like a shadow in the night, his face still unreadable. To this day, I don't know what his intentions were. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe we overreacted. But the way he moved, the way he slowly trapped us between him and his truck, sent a kind of fear through me that I'll never forget. I'm 21 years old now, but I moved to Maine from the Florida Keys when I was about 5. Ever since then, I've lived in the same old farmhouse. The house has always felt strange. Sometimes I think it might be haunted, but maybe it's just in my head. Moving here was a huge change. In the Keys, I grew up surrounded by warm beaches and the lively ocean. Maine was different, beautiful but colder, quieter. The ocean was still there, about 30 minutes away, but the water was icy, and the landscape felt ancient, almost untouched. Our farmhouse was tucked deep into the land, surrounded by towering pine trees and a river that curved around most of the property. It was old, really old, and carried a certain presence, like a house that had lived through many stories before us. I still remember the first time I saw it. It looked like something from a storybook, nestled among rolling hills and wildflower fields. My mom and I explored the property while my dad unloaded our things. We followed a narrow path through the woods, stepping carefully through tall grasses and clusters of wildflowers. In the distance, a single crab apple tree stood alone in the field. I wanted to run to it, but my mom warned me about ticks and told me to wait until the grass was mowed. As we wandered deeper into the property, we stumbled upon something unexpected. A hidden trail leading across a small stream. We hopped over the water and climbed a steep hill, where we found an old stone structure and a waterfall trickling nearby. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the ruins. My mom explained it was once a mill, built long ago to grind grain. The town's historical society later told us that our property dated back to 1779, and a fire had destroyed the original house. Only the barn remained, and in 1891, a new house, our house, was built onto it. But something about the house didn't feel quite right. Inside, the floors groaned under our steps, and the tall windows, warped with age, cast strange, distorted reflections. It was as if the house was watching us, breathing around us. My sister and I ignored the uneasy feeling, racing upstairs to claim our bedrooms. The wallpaper in the hallway showed a faded scene of rolling fields and deer, eerily similar to the land outside, but in dull, earth-toned colors. Despite its beauty, the house never felt like it truly belonged to us. Because of its age, it needed renovations. My dad, a carpenter, hired 2 friends to help. During the work, we all slept together in one room while his friends stayed downstairs on an air mattress. That first night, something strange happened. I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time. In my dream, spiders crawled over my body, their tiny legs skittering against my skin. I tried to move, but I was trapped. Worse, I felt something reaching through my mattress, a hand trying to pull me down. I woke up, gasping for breath. My parents told me it was just stress from the move, but after that, the nightmares kept coming. Once I moved into my own room, I started sleeping with my little sister instead. I told myself it was just childhood fear, but the first night in her room, I woke up thirsty and went downstairs for water. The stairwell had no windows, just 6 doors, 4 bedrooms, a closet, and a small attic door. As I stepped into the hallway, I avoided looking toward my mother's dark office, but something made me glance back. In the shadows, something glowed. A soft, floating orb hovered in the corner, pulsing faintly, white with tiny blue flickers dancing inside. I wasn't scared, just curious. I stepped closer. Then, something in my gut told me to stop. I turned and hurried back to bed, my heart pounding. I never saw anything like that again. As I got older, I chalked it up to sleepwalking, overactive imagination. But the house has always felt like it carries something unseen. Maybe it's just a trick of the mind. Or maybe, after all these years, the house is still keeping secrets. When I was a teenager, I lived alone in a small apartment in a rough neighborhood. The streets were dangerous during the day, but at night, they became even worse. Trouble lurked around every corner, and even my next-door neighbor was part of that world. I had learned how to survive early on. Life didn't give me a choice. Before getting that apartment, I had nowhere to call home, sleeping wherever I could and always staying on guard. I wasn't weak or naive, but I was still young, and sometimes fear crept in. One night, I was up late playing Zelda when an unexpected knock shattered the silence. It was past midnight, and my apartment was completely dark. Hardly anyone knew where I lived, so my stomach twisted with unease. I had a small window with a clear view of my front door and the surrounding courtyard. Carefully, I peeked outside. Nothing. The night was still. The other apartments were dark. No one stood at my door. Then, a voice. At first, he sounded casual, almost friendly. He asked strange, random questions. Do you have kids? I have toys they can play with. Are you hungry? I have food. The forced kindness sent a chill down my spine. I didn't answer. His tone shifted. I know you're in there. I don't know why you're making this so hard. I'm your friend. I had no phone, no one to call. The only option was the police, but I didn't trust them. Running wasn't an option either. The streets outside were just as dangerous as what was waiting at my door. And the man, he never tried to force his way in. He just stood there, knocking, talking, waiting. Sometimes his voice was calm and coaxing. Other times it was low and frustrated. The unpredictability terrified me. I sat frozen, my heart pounding, barely breathing. I kept glancing out the window, scanning the darkness, but I never saw him. He was always just out of sight. The knocking, the voice, the waiting. It went on for hours. Finally, around 5 a.m., silence. I waited, making sure he was really gone before I dared to move. The fear lingered for days. I stayed in that apartment for several more months, but he never came back. To this day, I still don't know who he was, what he wanted, or why he chose my door that night, and I never want to find out.